John, you've saved me from playing a little jazz, being the DJ. We've just talked about the over 30s applying to school and how they really need to articulate this message. But I had a question for you. We had another fantastic alumni panel, and asking each of the four of them from LBS, IESA, Asia School of Business, and Darden, how they went beyond those sort of post-MBA salaries and a typical measure of the ROI of business school, and what else it had brought them. And of course, it's such a personal response, and there are so many different perspectives. Now, as the godfather of rankings and someone that provides more insight on the major media rankings for business schools than anybody, what are we missing, or how do we capture? Can we have some sort of TripAdvisor or Yelp site where we could rate the schools with a star system? I tend to use that whenever I turn to Deliveroo and Uber Eats, but how do we capture all of these other components that are key to the MBA experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because when you look at the rankings overall, I believe it's like roughly 45 to 50% of the overall rankings are related merely to pay and employment, which is extraordinary because it's such a short-term look at the true benefits of the education. In many cases, of course, doors are closed to many of these jobs if you don't have an MBA, number one. Number two, it doesn't really have anything to do with the long-term satisfaction that you're going to have in your career. I mean, the chances are you're going to find the job you want, the job you'll love, where you can pour the most passion into it. That leads to personal fulfillment that speaks far more loudly to one's quality of life and impact and influence than a mere dollar sign with a few numbers attached to them. We did a little analysis a number of years ago with a company that tracks pay to try to get at the lifetime earnings gain of individual MBAs from different schools. And, you found that over a lifetime, an MBA graduate could make as much as, depending on what school you go to, 3 times more than an undergraduate on average. I think the name of the story, if you can look it up if anyone wants to, is the most lucrative 7-figure MBAs on the planet, something like that. But it was really interesting data, and of course, it's a little dated now. The numbers would be much more sexy, but really, it's the friends you gather, the knowledge you gain, the access to a career that's going to be more fulfilling for you, and where you're going to learn more and be more valuable and have the kind of impact that you really want to have in the world. Those are the real less tangible benefits of an MBA degree that can't be measured by paycheck.
Yeah, and if I just take some examples, Anna, the admissions director at IMD, was talking about this leadership journey, whether it's 1 or 2 years, and just the self-confidence that will instill in an individual. She says it's tangible from day one when they arrive in Lausanne to when we see them leave the school, this remarkable transformational journey that they've been on. Virginie's talking about 92 nationalities among your classmates at INSEAD, and Felix, a Darden graduate, his family says that for all of those sometimes awkward family get-togethers, Thanksgiving or over the holidays, they said, wow, the way that you frame our conversation. So they're even seeing it on a personal level, and how it sort of seeps into their way of handling different situations.
Now, Matt, did you get any scoops today?
No scoops. I got no double-digit figure that we'd have liked, or this is going to be the record year. Clearly they're knee-deep in application volume. We spoke with the European schools about they work with 4 rounds, whereas of course at the M7 extreme end, Harvard's really gone down to 2 rounds, given that they devote their final round in April just to the 2+2 seniors in college. And again, this theme, it was just taking the pressure off with round 1. Because to successfully fill the class across 4 rounds. So a very strong message about, for those that want to go to school in September, Imperial is still taking applications and filling the class for September. The other 3 schools had a January class start, and there are a lot of international schools with that option. So they're just getting started for this coming cycle. Nick Barneville from ESMT, that of course we really love, made a great comment. He said, what also feels different this year, last year people were applying pre-pandemic with an expectation of the business school experience that they would have. At least now we know that we will welcome them, whether it's in September or in January, and their eyes are open. They know what the chances are of partial campus closure and other things, and he just feels a lot better about that sort of visibility that everybody has as they go into this. Now, of course, the GMAT and the GRE, just as you were joining us, again, it's a year we saw last year where Kellogg announced they'd have a waiver, and schools were dealing with online centers that were closing and how they were giving students extra time for the GMAT and GRE. Sloan and Darden have maintained that policy, have been joined by other schools that not for the but the GMAT has been a story. Look at the last 5 years; it was getting as high as the NASDAQ. Those average scores coming into schools, and it was Kirsten Moss, who will be joining us later on today, who spoke at that wonderful Center Court event we had at the NASDAQ Center in San Francisco, and said, our GSB GMAT averages are too high, as she thinks about the sort of qualities that we're looking at. So with testing and its future, we thought it would be wonderful to invite a great partner of the Center Court events, Scott Woodbury. Scott, it's lovely to see you. GMAT and GRE, it's been a very busy year for you. You've said you've seen the unicorns of the GMAT world. Now, we know the unicorns of business, but what are the unicorns of the GMAT world?
Yeah, John and Matt, it's great to see you guys. Yeah, it's been a very busy year. We've never seen the number of people coming for preparation, studying harder, studying longer, putting more diligence and care into the GMAT scores. And yeah, we've seen some crazy test increases. The biggest unicorn we saw, a 280 to a 780, which I think must have the record. Never in my life did I think we would see a 200.
Yeah. A 280 to a 780. You know what that tells me?
Verified scores too.
Just totally screwy.
This person, wow, she worked for 4 years. Now, not everyone can do that, but yeah, she put the time in. She did 3.5, 4 years, and she's currently waiting to see what's going to happen for her schools. But it was amazing. Yeah.
You've always maintained, Scott, that there's sweat and tears that you need to leave on the GMAT and GRE study table, and the idea that people are taking more time, is that in part because we're working from home, so we don't have that client trip to Cleveland, and can set aside a little bit more time for data sufficiency and critical reasoning?
Yeah, I think so. I think, in fact, actually, the pandemic has made, of course, it's been horrible for in general. But the small silver lining for the GMATs, I think people had more time to sit back and think and focus. What are their goals? How are they going to reach their goals? I think people had more downtime to study from home. People weren't commuting as much. I think people had more flexibility, and I think they had greater perspective too in terms of their lives and what they wanted to accomplish and what the practical steps they would need to take to get there. So yeah, there was some small benefit to people studying for the GMAT for sure.
We discussed the difference.
I'm interested here because you say business is so good, but 2/3 of the top 100 MBA programs in the United States, at least, are either test optional or are actively promoting test waiver policies. You have GMAT running sweepstakes to get people to register for the test. I mean, they're giving away Amazon cards, giving away thousands of dollars worth of GMAT prep material to get business. The GMAT, of course, has been losing market share to GRE for quite a few years. Yeah. How do you reconcile all these different things going on?
Well, let me tell you 3 short stories of hope, and I think most people will resonate with these. I'll tell you 3 stories about 3 students who stand out in my mind. First was a woman. Unfortunately, she was abused mentally and physically. What did that mean? She didn't get good grades in middle school. Who could? She didn't do very well in high school. I mean, who could? She had bigger problems in calculus or AP English. You know, some point in college, she went to a mediocre college, and at some point she said, you know, I'm not going to be defined by my past. I'm not going to let where I grew up, who my parents were, what happened to me dictate the next 60 years of my life. And she studied very hard, and she earned an exceptional GMAT score. And she recently graduated from HBS. Now, I've never sat on the admissions committee up there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on a cold, December night and had to make a decision. But my sensibilities tell me that had she had not scored the 740, my guess would be she may not have attended HBS.
Yeah.
Second story was a Mexican immigrant, a first-generation college student. She didn't have advisors telling her about starting nonprofits and how to get a 4.0 in AP English, et cetera, et cetera. She had to figure it out for herself. And she didn't have a pedigree. She didn't go to Phillips Andover Academy. She didn't graduate from Princeton. But at some point in her life, she said, I deserve a future that I should have. Why not me? And she used the GMAT to use it as a stepping stone. She got into Stanford Business School and today is doing exceptionally well. I have one more example. He was an investment banker. He partied like crazy. I mean, this guy was the beer pong champion, he told me. Well, he didn't get great grades. Things weren't, exactly what you would say. This is a sort of a model student for an M7 MBA program. But he matured, right? He said, I'm not going to be defined by what I did in college or what I did in high school. I'm a different person now. I'm 26 years old. I have a different view of the world. I think he had like a 2.7 GPA. He said, you know what? I'm going to make the future that I want to have. I'm going to demonstrate an ability to show that I'm ready to come to school. And he got an exceptional GMAT score. He went on to Wharton. Investment banker on Wall Street. He wasn't the most interesting character, right? Nothing wrong with investment bankers, but he wasn't sort of he was at a disadvantage, right? But he proved himself. So often, we can demonize this test, but the one message I would hope to convey to the people watching is it can be a vehicle for hope and for change. And for anybody who says, I'm never going to be defined by my past. I won't let history, I won't let my past, I won't let small mistakes I've made before dictate my way forward. That's the GMAT.
Yeah, look, you're making a good argument for this test.
Yeah, so Sloan and Darden might have the waiver, but as we know, John, applicants applying to several of the M7 schools, as soon as you've got Harvard, Stanford, Wharton on that list,
you got to take the test.
Nail a good test score, and then beyond. Don't forget that McKinsey and other recruiters, Stephen just wrote in to remind us that there are a number of employers that ask to see test scores, and they obviously want to see competitive test scores and what it implies about certain skills. Where do you think, Scott, things are going in terms of GMAT and GRE? John was talking about how GRE has taken considerable market share in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years. I think it was like, 27, 28% of Harvard's incoming class. How do you see that playing out?
That's a great question. I can speak personally. For our students, still the majority of them are enrolling in GMAT courses. I probably think over time you're going to see more of a parity between the two. You might even see a 50-50 split between people taking the GRE or the GMAT. The GRE is no easier. It's just a different test. There's sort of the notion that the GMAT GRE is a free ride. It's not. It comes with its own challenges, and it's about the same preparation time for students. So I wouldn't be surprised if both tests became equally as prevalent in the near future.
Right. I suppose some will look at the fact that the GRE is more widely used for graduate school, and as a consequence, your percentile performance is being compared to 1 million other test takers, many who might be looking at grad school well beyond any STEM-related subjects and humanities. So the quant section perhaps is more accessible. Certainly, I guess, before making the plunge in either direction, take a look at both options, right? I'm sure that Target Test Prep, there are ways to take an online practice test just to get a sense of where you feel the most comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. I think people would be smart to take both tests, take a practice test, get a baseline score. I mean, obviously, if one was significantly higher than the other, that could give you a leading indicator in terms of which test may be better for you. Also, in terms of what you're more interested in studying, obviously, there's some different nuances between the tests that could make one more conducive to the other. Some people are very interested in improving their writing. English grammar, can be good for the GMAT. Some people love learning vocabulary. Things like that might, lend themselves more towards the GRE.
Right.
What are the key learnings, the key takeaways of students who come to you who score below a 650 and are able to get into the 700s? Are there three things that distinguish them from everyone else?
Yeah, there's two big ones, John. It's a wonderful question. And this is the message of hope that we're always trying to get across from people. Man, these tests are so learnable and they are so beatable. And as I explained to Matt a couple weeks ago, it comes down to two things, and neither of these ideas are mine. I'm piggybacking on work done by people, obviously, much smarter than me. But number one is grit. You need to stick with it. The number one thing, you look when someone gets a 620 versus a 740, if I had to say one thing, it's to keep going. There's going to be setbacks. I mean, nobody knows how to do this from the start. What's the unit digit of 7 to the 4 millionth power? I don't know. Nobody knows. You got to learn it, right? What's the ratio of this to that to this to the perimeter? I'm exaggerating here, being hyperbolic, but nobody knows, right? Somebody has to show you, and you learn step by step by step. You're like, you know what? This is not too bad. So it's the ability to keep going. And it always makes us so sad when people say, hey, we can't do it. You can do it. And the people who have done it before you have just been willing to dust themselves off a few more times, stand up and say, I'm going to make this happen. And it's hard. So having that grit, and then also having a growth mindset, because success doesn't come easy. We have to work at it. So realizing that, we can learn from our failures and they're not going to define us, and we can continue moving forward. These are the two things. It's not intelligence. It's not where you went to school. It's not did you take AP English, John. It's whether you're willing to persevere in the face of the headwinds.
Right.
Well,
Well, and when you have someone who becomes disheartened and disenchanted because they put in the time, but they're not yet seeing the result,
Yeah.
how do you inspire them to keep up on the race?
Yeah, it's a great question. Progress is not linear, especially on the GMAT. So the one thing people have to realize is you're not going to study, 20%, so to speak, and get a 20% gain. You might study 50% and get a 2% gain. Why is that? Well, the test is adaptive, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot on the test, and it's adaptive. So it's very good at determining your ability level. So it's not until the end of the process that things start to coalesce and you start seeing these practice scores going up and your confidence going up. So people have to realize there's going to be this long sort of onboarding process, during which they're not going to see the results they want. You got to keep going. You got to keep moving forward. And at some point, it's almost like, whoa, I got a 720 today on a practice test. Where did that come from? Well, it came from, the last 6 months of hard work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time, but it's wonderful to have you with us, Scott. And it looks like it's going to be another busy year. John is about to host the next panel, I think, with gatekeepers, advice for not just the GMAT, but the wider application. So we'll keep up that grit and that determination that is needed. And you're a fantastic resource. Highly recommended to any of our viewers. Thanks for joining us at Center Court.
Thanks for having me, John and Matt. Have a wonderful day. God bless.
Not a pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, John. Take care, guys. Bye.
Stay safe.